Hello, everyone. If you're here for the Crisis Connectivity Digital Inclusion Before, During, and After Disasters webinar, you're in the right place. We're going to give folks another minute to join, and then we'll get started. We're excited you're here. And I hope everyone's having a wonderful Digital Inclusion Week so far. It's been a week full of jam-packed events all across the country, some really innovative events and some really exciting events. So we're really excited to celebrate with you here today for Digital Inclusion Week. For those of you just joining, this is the Crisis Connectivity Digital Inclusion Before, During, and After Disasters webinar. We'll give folks one more minute to join. Okay, welcome. Welcome everyone to the Crisis Connectivity Digital Inclusion Before, During, and After webinar, or Before, During, and After Disasters webinar. We're really excited you're here with us today. A big thank you to Mission Telecom for sponsoring Digital Inclusion Week in this webinar. And this webinar is intended to continue conversations that have already started. This past year at Net Inclusion, we had a really robust conversation around what to do to prepare for disasters in the digital inclusion space. And we'd really love to shift our conversation from talking about the challenges to talking about solutions for digital inclusion before, during, and after disaster. Today, you'll hear from a rock star panel, each of which have a lot of experience in this space. And they'll share experiences from their on-the-ground experience. They'll share expertise from their on-the-ground experiences in dealing with disasters, and also will provide some practical blueprints and strategies that you all and communities can adopt to strengthen digital equity in disaster preparedness and recovery. So let's go ahead and get started. But before we get started, we want to hear a little bit from you all. We'd like to hear who's here in the room. So we have 3 polls that we are going to launch and get a little bit more information about who you are and where you're from. So here they are. So the first question is, what's your primary role or position? The second is, which industry do you work in, and which community do you primarily serve? And if you can ask all of them, or answer all of them, we'd love to hear from you. So while you're doing that, we'll go to the next slide and I'll start introducing the session. So if you're new here, I'm Amy Huffman. I'm the policy director for the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, an organization that I am very proud to serve as a policy director for. We have over 2,000 affiliates across the country. Many of you are on the call in all 50 states and partnerships with 47 tribal entities. Our affiliates are the boots on the ground, the subject matter experts who help people get connected to the internet through finding digital access services in their community, or helping them find an affordable offer, a broadband offer, or find a device. Our affiliates, you all are rock stars, and we exist to serve you. And we also make sure that we provide feedback and information to policymakers on your needs. Next slide, Pamela. This week is Digital Inclusion Week. We have over 371 different events registered across the country, which is just insane. We're so excited to be here with you all. If you haven't registered your Digital Inclusion Week event, guess what? It's not too late. You can still do that. Just go to our website and add that. This year's theme is community-driven digital futures, and this webinar falls right in line with our theme. Next slide. So before we get started on this, we can go ahead and end the poll. It looks like we have a mix of folks here, all different types of positions from all different types of organizations, primarily nonprofits, and then serving all different types of communities, rural, tribal, and urban. So we're really thankful you all are here, and thank you for what you do. So today I'm honored to be joined by Rhea Ya-Ching, the Executive Director for Mission Telecom. Diane Connery, the Development Director for Pottsboro Library. Sarah Nichols, the Energy and Economic Development Manager for the Land of Sky Regional Council of Government. And Sabre Johnson, the General Manager for the County of Los Angeles. Next slide, Pamela. Before I pass the mic to them, I just want to remind you all, if you haven't already, now's after this webinar at 1:58 or 1:59 p.m. today, Eastern Time. That's a really great time to go register for Net Inclusion, which will be in February in Chicago. We'll have more conversations like this there in person in real life, and we'd love to see you there. And with that, we're going to turn the slides off and we're going to start this webinar and really dive into conversation with the folks in the room. Each panelist is going to give you a little bit of information about themselves and what work they've done pre, during, and post disasters. And then we're going to jump into a facilitated Q&A, and then we're going to take a lot of questions from you all. We hope you've brought your questions. Again, we hope you come out of this with some practical tips and guidelines for how to prepare for disaster. And I'd love to say really quickly to set this conversation up is that none of us are emergency preparedness workers. Like none of us have an emergency management degree. Well, maybe one of them does that I don't know of, but I know I certainly don't. However, digital inclusion is so important in preparing for disasters, in disaster mitigation during disasters, and then post-disaster in that recovery phase of making sure people get the services that they need and can recover and communities can thrive. And so everyone in this room has found themselves playing some role in this ecosystem. And we want to tease that out a little bit today, what roles everyone has played. And then that way you all can feel more prepared moving forward and what role you can play in your community if and when a disaster strikes. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Rhea, and she's going to talk a little bit about the work that Mission Telecom does, and then we'll keep going and we'll come back to questions in a few minutes. Rhea?
Thank you, Amy. And that was such a great tee off because I do not have a background in emergency management at all. So I jumped into this work 20 years ago, and that's kind of why this topic is so personal for me. I spent 10 years in telecommunications in the Caribbean, launching broadband, island by island all across the Caribbean. And success was never simple. And the problem reaching, remote communities, sparsely populated communities, was not easy. And, from the vantage point that I was looking at, I'll provocatively say it was financially unfeasible. Take that as you will, right? And so therefore that's not unique to America. That's everywhere. And of course, we were always constantly interrupted by hurricanes, volcanoes, earthquakes, you name it. And of course, that doesn't discriminate by population, but it does discriminate by class. And so the unconnected class, the underconnected class is, of course, disproportionately affected. And so from the vantage point of the broadband provider, there was just so much you could do, and that was it. And so that's when I realized this was a collective problem. And so then I turned my professional interest for the next 10 years, supporting governments, intergovernmental agencies, and even private sector, trying to collaborate towards developing and deploying these resilience plans, national infrastructure plans, And then came 2017, this unprecedented, and for me, it hasn't stopped. When, Hurricane Maria tore through Dominica and then the Virgin Islands, and then, of course, who could forget the visions of Puerto Rico? And I stood there and I was like, resilience plans be damned. Like, like whatever I planned for, like we all planned for, be damned. And then Hurricane Dorian came in 2019, and I could not tell you the tears that rolled down my eyes when I landed post emergency um, into the northern Bahamas. And I had never seen anything, witnessed anything like it. It took a year for us to get electricity restored to the islands. And you can't start delivering connectivity services until you have a robust infrastructure for electricity. And there was no break. There's no break 2021, the volcano in St. Vincent, displacing 20% of the population. And I sat here, today thinking about this answer, and I said, why is this so personal for me? And then I realized something very profound. Asheville, North Carolina has the population the size of Dominica. Puerto Rico is the size of Chicago. We're going to be getting there, in February of next year. St. Thomas, the Virgin Islands, is the size of Brunswick, Georgia. And that's when I realized that when I joined Mission Telecom in 2023, our broadband program, by the way, started July of last year. When Hurricane Helene came in September of last year, I sat there and I said, this is a mission-driven, nonprofit telecommunications organization, only a handful in the country, and I will be damned if we will not make this personal for us. We are purpose-built for this, and essentially, that's why we are here. So I'm just really, really happy to be co-sponsoring this with the NDIA. And I'm just looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Raya. I think you set up Sarah beautifully. Sarah, if you'd like to give us a little introduction, that'd be great.
Hey, Sarah Nichols. I'm the Energy and Economic Development Program Manager at Land of Sky Regional Council. Regional councils serve geographic territories. In our case, Asheville, North Carolina is in that footprint. We are in Western North Carolina, and we are councils of government tend to be locally led and driven on any regional issue. So we are on scene somewhere generally in the background on every communication, I'm in communications, every community issue. So that could be like housing and healthcare, aging, workforce development, economic development. My spaces are energy and connectivity. And I've been doing broadband infrastructure work for years and saw the need at some point that the people don't just need the lines and wires and signals, but they also need all of the things that reduce the barriers to connectivity, like affording the service and having the device and knowing how to use it. So I entered this space and have been leading that work in Western North Carolina, plus through the storm. So last year we had Hurricane Helene, which tore up a good part of our region, and we've been in response and recovery ever since.
Thank you, Sarah. Sabre, we'll pass to you. And Sabre's from the County of Los Angeles, if you missed her introduction, and we'd love to hear more about your work.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you for having me. I'm Sabre Johnson. I'm a general manager with the County of Los Angeles, specifically our department, Internal Services Department. And specifically under that, it's with our initiative known as Delete the Divide, which was started in 2021 in direct response to all the digital equity issues that were revealed to us by COVID. We have approached the digital divide from what I call a 360 approach, employment, devices, small business, and education to the public. So as you said, we are not, we are very program driven. We are not disaster experts and did not see ourselves as having anything to do with disasters because we're not infrastructure, like there's other parts of our department that do infrastructure. But when the unprecedented fires hit Los Angeles County in January, we suddenly found that we actually do have a role. So it's not just the infrastructure, it is the needs of all of these people that have been impacted. And that's where program folks come in, because it is us who address the lack of devices, the helping small businesses get back on their feet with a device or other support, or in addition, filling the gap for all of the people that were affected that did not have digital skills and all their recovery, all the things they're going to have to do, all their applications and things were going to need to be done online. And a lot of folk, we encountered so many people that did not have the skills, especially our senior population who probably have been out the workforce a long time. And so we found ourselves thinking about ourselves now in a disaster recovery role. How do we help? And also, and we'll talk later, what practical things can we bring to the table to talk about preparedness? And so, thanks again for having me. I can't wait to talk more about Delete the Divide.
Thank you, Sabra. And Diane, we'd love to hear a little bit more about you and Pottsboro Library and the work you all are doing in Texas.
Thank you. Yes, and I've already learned so much from this group. I'm with a small library, rural library in North Texas. And if any of you are rural librarians, you know that you're doing a lot of different jobs. So I'll just start by saying, if you're a library and a crisis or emergency occurs in your area, you will be called on, whether you have a plan or not, which we didn't, but it will come to you. So, because there are not so many services and other programs and city workers, as a library, we've ended up seeing our role as information, how the community gets the information they need, which I think is appropriate for libraries. So yes, I do hope to share some just real practical tips that we've learned the hard way.
Thank you, Diane. So to get us started, I'd love to set the scene a little bit more for each of you. And all of you, you're here because you've become de facto experts in this field, whether you wanted to or not, right? And I'd say you probably didn't want to, but now you're here. So we'd love to hear what were the immediate digital inclusion needs you saw during the disasters in your areas? And then how is your community doing now? And then in terms of its digital inclusion recovery, and then what are the biggest gaps still in your recovery efforts, and really specifically to digital inclusion? Sarah, why don't we start with you? Since it's been about a year since Helene hit Western North Carolina and Georgia and Florida and all the places in between, and hear a little bit more about what you saw on the ground and in the midst of the storm, and then after as well.
It was funny, just earlier this week, of course, we've been recounting the storm a lot because of the anniversary. So there's a lot of like events and emotions and conversations. And just this week, we were talking about the groups that do the simulations of when you struggle with the digital divide. And I'm like, oh, we did the real life simulation of that everybody got to participate in, not just a few people who decided to join us that day. And it is terrifying. It is so scary to see your community not be able to connect to each other. So we've spent decades trying to like reduce this digital divide, we'll say, whatever that means to you. Like we've been building on infrastructure, we've been creating a dependency on technologies that had somewhat disintegrated some social fabrics and created efficiencies. So we've been building lives towards this goal. And then when all of that doesn't exist, like we don't even know how to function. So immediately I happened to be out of the area, so I could see what was going on to some extent and could see what was coming out of the region. And it's like, oh, my people don't have a voice. They can't say, I need help or I am okay. And we had almost everybody missing. So everybody was a missing person for a while. In reality, most of those people were okay. A lot of them were not. And we needed to be able to find the ones who were not and get them the assistance. All of that happens on a communications network, a physical infrastructure that also is complemented with a social fabric. So super scary, incredibly dangerous, and unbelievably frustrating as somebody who's worked to get people online for years. Like this is my whole platform, and I'm watching people not be able to do it. So the physical systems I've helped build, the social fabric I've helped build, all of that missing in an ability to coordinate. Once those things did start to come online, and I worked with telecom carriers to help coordinate and figure these things out, then your next issues of things are online, but people lost their devices because it was a physical event. So then we started to roll that out, or they're in transient situations, meaning they need a different kind of technology. So it's like one after another, and having leadership like the people in this room who can see one step ahead. If you're in this situation that like, oh, and I know how to get a hotspot and I know how to find a device, like you all thinking about the order of operations and when people are going to need what is like a huge efficiency for helping people find resources faster.
That's great, Sarah. Thank you. Sabra, it's been about 10 months since the fires started in LA. Can you tell us a little bit about what you saw during that time as the immediate needs for digital inclusion, and then after the fire stopped, what you've seen?
Oh, thanks. So I'd love to say that when the fires broke out, I'm like, ha, I can do this. But again, I was sitting there looking like, oh, this is tragic. And then when we were contacted by a local radio station that said, hey, there's an event here for fire victims where they were, giving out food and other resources. They said, would you come do some laptops? And we said, yeah, sure. So we decided to take about 200 laptops. When we showed up, there was already a line around the corner. And then in getting to talk to people, and that's when it really came home to realizing people have literally lost everything. Like they didn't grab their computer, they didn't grab their because they thought they were going home. Some people didn't even grab a change of clothes, right? So that's when it hit us like, oh, wow, no, there is a need because people left these things. There were schools. Actually, we even helped some schools, smaller schools, with laptops as well. So that was when it really hit us, the magnitude and also just the sheer number of people. It's a number on the news until you're face to face with those that are actually affected. And so like I said, we did 200 laptops that day. Some people left empty-handed because we ran out. So we said, hey, we got to come back. We did another 400. We brought other resources, other things we saw we needed were, when people showed up, their phone or whatever they had was going dead. Okay, we need to have something for people to charge their thing while they're waiting. Like there were all of these things. But also what came out was that a lot of people just don't know how to get online. Even if they have access to the infrastructure, they don't know how, they're afraid. So that's where we saw still the big need for our digital skills training through our Learn Basic Tech program. So we were doing devices, but we were also teaching at the same time and then saying, hey, let us supplement your education so that you can get through this FEMA, application process through all of these hurdles that you're going to have to get through. I mean, I can't imagine not having that base knowledge and having to go through. I work for the government, so I know what our documents and our applications and our things are like, and that's really difficult. A lot of people didn't even know their email address. So imagine all the things that FEMA is going to ask them that they don't know. So just also seeing the need for the education was a big deal, and understanding now, like, oh no, there is a role for us. I mean, we haven't had a disaster of this magnitude probably since the Northwoods earthquake, and where this many people were affected. So it just brought all that home for us.
Yeah, and that skilling, that's something that can be happening now, right? In preparation for what happens in the future if something
Absolutely.
happens. So, Diane, love to hear a little bit more about, the different you all have had several power outages in Pottsboro, and that really changed the way you all work and operate, and love to hear more about that and the work you all do to prepare for future disasters.
Yes, our thought along emergencies came out of a February 2021 freeze where many of our people were without power for 5 to 7 days. But what we quickly observed is there's no communication between people who have resources and people who need resources. And in our case, the actual city government um, couldn't get into City Hall. They couldn't answer phones. So the library kind of like took charge of the situation because we were seeing on social media, people were saying they couldn't make bottles for their baby, they couldn't flush their toilets. So that has continued, that we have learned communications are key. We have no newspaper, there's no TV station. In disasters, those first responder workers are going to go to the larger population centers first. So as a rural town, we had to take care of ourselves. And so it became like, how do we reach people who aren't connected to social media? We don't have their phone numbers. We who do we call? Who do we text? And so that became a long process to build a communications asset map. And NDIA has a toolkit for how to do different kinds of asset maps. But the key to it is you're bringing together people beyond your usual organizations and volunteers. You really have to be intentional about thinking outside the box. Like, who can contact the farmers? All these different resources. Are there HOAs? Are there neighbors? And so it's about gathering those people over and over to try to get to where everybody can be reached somehow. Here's the key. You've got to keep that current, because I may put down like, okay, so and so is my contact at 4-H, and then a year from now, that's no good anymore. So it does have to be this ongoing, sustained relationship. One of the saddest stories I heard afterwards was United Way in a nearby town had a semi truckload of blankets that they wanted to give away, but they didn't know who to call in Pottsboro. Now they have my name and I have other people's names. So we know how to dispense those things. We also were able to participate in a research project by Texas State University. It's a well-known model called the Copewell model. And it is about how you build sustained relationship with stakeholders of all kinds in your community. And when they first asked me to join and bring in 8 stakeholders, I brought the people who I am familiar with. But through being forced to diversify the group, I learned that there are other kinds of sort of crisis and disasters in our community that aren't the immediate natural disasters we think of, but things like childcare, transportation, and all those things, do feed into a disaster. so one of the things that has come out of it for us as a library is helping sign up people for Code Red so they can get emergency notifications. And we have learned that a good adoption rate for that is considered 15% in a community. So if only 15% of your people are signed up to receive emergency communications, they may not be aware of what's coming. They also may not be getting the notifications that in our area, believe it or not, the wind can knock out the power for 8 hours. And so if they are signed up to receive notification that like, okay, Encore says it should be back online by 3:30 this afternoon, then that's helpful to them. And then we're including different kinds of preparedness in our social media, in our outreach, in our programming of all kind. And for instance, a recent thing that we're working on is we've been given a grant, luckily, for a bookmobile, but we're adding to that emergency communications so that we can have a hotspot that can travel with this bookmobile and laptops in it. So it could be maybe a command center if needed. We've also, we're putting in an outdoor workstation that's solar powered, and we'll have redundant internet connections, because if we're wireless and the tower goes down, then how do we make sure people can still be connected? So it's just multifaceted how all this comes together, food distribution and blankets and notifications and everything. So it really is about getting to know your neighbor. Are there people who are bedbound in the neighborhood? If something went, if the train that comes through our town went off the tracks and spilled chemicals, how do we reach everybody? And so libraries are information, and we've taken on that role.
I love how you are leveraging the human infrastructure, right? And mapping that. We love that. NDA, we have an asset map tool that Pamela put in the chat. Encourage you to take a look at that and tailor it for your own needs. And then you're also thinking about dual purposes of existing programs, like that bookmobile that's just genius to then equip it to be ready for disasters in the future. Rhea, we'd love to hear more from you as well, and how Mission Telecom comes alongside communities during disaster, and what you've seen in your many years of work in this area and field.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter where we are. I think the level of digital fragility that exists across the nation is still unacceptable. And it's not unacceptable because we haven't progressed. It's unacceptable because we're going to have an event, a disaster event, now that I now have statistics, every 18 days. We're going to have billion-dollar events happening 53 times a year. So it's like the sort of the post keeps moving, the stick keeps moving. And so it's no longer acceptable to say, hey, we have connectivity for 70% of the population of the United States. And so this fragility, of course, disproportionately affects rural, low income, tribal, and that's a fact. So it's compounded when you have disasters. And so for me, and it's coming off of something Dan was talking about, and Sarah, like broadband is an afterthought. Connectivity is still an afterthought. Now, there are structural reasons for this, and I will again be quite provocative about it. Like in every state, there's perhaps, there's one utility, water provider, right? And, 70% of the country has one or maybe two electricity providers. Can you guys count how many broadband providers exist in this country? Okay, if you had to coordinate, this is a problem, right? And so, but then we think about it from a different angle. The other two, which are considered utilities, are considered as for good, social good, public good infrastructure. And I don't want to get into politics on how that got reframed for broadband. We're not going there today. But the idea now is that if you are at the mercy of a largely, supremely private sector led connectivity ecosystem, how do you marry what is shareholder centered from what is public stakeholder centered? How do you bring it together, especially when it is so largely fragmented as well? There's fiber, fragmentation, fiber, there's wireless, there's satellite, you name it, let's just add it all up. For us, where we play, we started off the program 16 months old. Let's just reach out, like literally, let's just reach out to Sarah. That was like the first reach out. Let's reach out through the partners that we have, and as they grow, they will become extensions. Libraries, nonprofits, community centers, schools, they became obvious extensions for us. The non-obvious ones we need to learn about, because that's who we reach. So again, we're one of the few who takes this public good and says it is for public good purpose. And so we are mandated to serve this community. So for me, like, I'm just like sort of from the connectivity perspective, I just want to say that if you insert broadband or connectivity as a public good principle, then every discussion for pre-planning, pre-positioning, post-restoration, they must be architected into those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. That it as an afterthought, rings very true. So, for our audience, we're going to open it up for our audience Q&A in like 3 minutes. So get your questions ready. Go ahead and start putting them in the chat if you would like, if you don't want to come off mute and ask them, and we can start sorting through those on our end. So, one more question for you all, and then we'll move to the audience Q&A. I'd love to hear about policy in this discussion, right? I think we were just talking about that a little bit, and think through, are there any local, state, or federal policies that have been particularly helpful in supporting digital resilience in your communities? And then if there have been any, what are the impacts that you've seen from the federal cuts to digital inclusion and broadband programs? And what are those impacts on digital resilience efforts? That's open to anyone, but maybe Sarah, can we start with you?
Sure. I have more like what offends me than what we did really well. But I will say, so locally in Atlantic Sky, we have a device refurbishment program in-house. And over the last few years, we've cultivated MOUs with a number of our governments to get their technology as they're getting rid of it. And that was what fueled what we branded as the Technology Recovery Program. So that was obviously work we were already doing. When the storm hit, I had shelves of refurbished devices that were in the pipeline to serve what was the normal framework of our programming. When I was like, whoa, light bulb moment, people lost their devices. I can't just sit on this pile of tech. And we got it out the door. And then as I was running out, other partners across the state were like, oh, we like this. And it was a loaves and fishes situation. I had the 300 of devices and we deployed over 2,000 by leveraging just what partners would give us that was sitting on their shelves. So that is, it was not so much a local policy, but it is a formal agreement we already had in place that was creating the pipeline already, as well as a number of projects we'd done in public Wi-Fi. And those are actual contracts and relationships and obligations to offer that kind of resource. We can't hold them to that if the systems just don't work. But it was a structure of like forcing them to get back online when they could and connecting some other dots. More has gone wrong in the last year than has gone right. From our perspective, we were announced as a awardee in the DEA funding. The timing of that was in January. Our storm was in September. So it was a great time for us to be getting a lot more resources coming through because our need was that much higher. And we had already, when we were thinking, oh, this is going to happen, we can pivot that project to help us with our storm recovery. So we had digibuses to do rural outreach in our program. We had Diane's idea too. We're going to throw a Starlink unit on that and it becomes a mobile resource set up for disaster recovery. The need for devices, all of that was relevant. So DEA funding, I applaud NDIA for doing what they did this week and pursuing that funding because we would still love to have ours too. And that's a really important program that took us a long time to get implemented in the first place, to never see it actually do anything. BEAD is very frustrating because that's the program that was supposed to connect 98% of households across the country, the ones who are still without internet. The non-deployment funds for our state alone that we might lose. So changes to that program included climate. And that seems like a scary time to start taking climate policy out of your framework. But also changes to technology, redefining how all of that works for our state alone might cost us over $1 billion. And that $1 billion was in the adoption, predominantly in the adoption space, which is it's offensive that we're not being recognized as that being an important part of what connectivity means.
Thank you, Sarah. Anyone else have any thoughts on this question?
I'll add on to that. Mine's policy adjacent. So every county, at least in Texas, I think it's nationwide, has to have an emergency mitigation plan. And in Grayson County, it's 1,231 pages long. It's done every 5 years. And so it's, to cover everything that could possibly happen. And so I was looking at that, and libraries are mentioned 3 times in that document. And those 3 times, what it says is you could hang a flyer at a library to talk about emergency things. We have seen that's not what happens in libraries. People go to libraries to reconnect and recharge and all those things. And so we have a concerted effort that we're working on. All the libraries in our county are showing up at every county commissioner meeting. We're rotating. And then we're planning for February to have a request for additional funding. And we're talking a lot about these essential services that we are providing the county, because they're not interested in funding story time. But if we can talk about, like, that was so neat when I got to hear Sabra at NDIA or Net Inclusion talking about how much time each person took that she worked with. That's really something as a library that I can show what it will take after a disaster to make this happen. So as part of policy, libraries need to be in this conversation as well.
Yeah, for sure. I had the same response you did, Diane, when I was reading through FEMA's disaster response framework, and I didn't see anything related to digital inclusion or digital equity or digital opportunity. It wouldn't, under no name was it there at all. So we submitted comments last year to FEMA, encouraging them to include digital inclusion as part of their framework, and we'll post a blog post of that in the chat. Sabra, did you want to briefly comment on, Diane talked about a little bit of the work you all have done with the like how long it takes to support an individual and what that looks like.
Right. I was in our conversation the other day, I was commenting that not everyone's needs are different, right? So some people work with a computer every day. You got these students or whatever here, they can take that new laptop and they can be gone. But we had other people that it took 45 minutes just to get them the laptop because they had to have an email address. They didn't have that. Okay, let us set you up a Gmail address. Let us show you how to access it. Let us remind you what your password is. Okay, now you can fill out this form. Now you can get your laptop. And now, right? And now they got to come back, right? Because they don't know how to set it up. And, we have to show them it's like a whole process, right? So some of them can take 10 minutes, but some folks are going to take an hour just to get the device, and then they need the lessons to learn. And who knows how many, we have a curriculum. That's what's great that we teach the basics, so we can do that for folks. But we also had to encourage them to come back because we don't want to give you the device and then it just sit there and actually not be helping you. Because we know the power that having that device is, it holds. So it's like, come back to us so we can help you, really um, recover from this disaster the best possible way, and really to expand, all the things and all the ways you can be connected in the community.
That's right. Maria, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, just one point I'd like to make to add on, because I'm hearing it so much and I really reacted to it. I think a lot of this is sort of reimagining what policy looks like. And I think what this has forced us to do is to move away from sort of the dependent type, like how we've traditionally focused on it, and more on the, like, how can our policies be, in a sense, diversified? So like two examples for me are like funding. Typical funding models are sort of dependency type models. I expect this funding from this funder, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we have to reimagine what funding looks like and find a sort of a diversified blend of models. And there are a couple that I've seen that truly start to look at unorthodox ways to be able to fund this from communities who understand the problem. So local cooperatives, local, credit unions, building financial models to help. High net worth individuals who want to do well and do good. These are, sort of untapped resources. And the second one is diversity in connectivity. Because I think if I look at Mission Telecom, for example, Mission Telecom is a mobile virtual network operator. That's an MVNO. And what we typically look at when it comes to resilience planning are the traditional carrier models, the AT&Ts, Verizon, T-Mobile, Comcast, the Xfinity, or et cetera, et cetera. But as extensions or using these networks are 50 plus MVNOs who operate partially nationally. We operate nationally. That can be part of the fabric of the connectivity or diversified portfolio of connectivity outreach partners. And so I just wanted to add those two dimensions. When we start to look at policy, I think we just have to start looking at how do we extend beyond the traditional.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, do we have any questions from our audience? And you can come off mute, raise your hand, please, and come off mute, or you can put your question in the chat. Don't worry, I have lots more if you don't have any. Okay, how about I would like to hear a little bit more about technology, speaking of Rhea, and what types of technology, whether mobile or satellite or community Wi-Fi or other tools, made a difference in anyone's response and recovery efforts, and then what technologies are still urgently needed. We've heard a little bit about the need for redundancy and different types. We've heard about throwing a Starlink in a bus, but would love to hear more about the different types of technologies and what roles those play. Rhea, if you have any thoughts on that.
Sure. I mean, I'll kick it off. And for me, I come from being able to look at it from a like low tech to very high tech. So, and in fact, what this has taught me is that they're all needed. So from low tech, my favorite people, the ham operators, who still geek out at universities, become very indispensable when it all collapses. And we never remember these guys. But then there is also the gold standard. Let's face it, fiber is the gold standard. But fiber doesn't always reach everywhere. It can't. And fiber itself has its redundant, it has its sort of disadvantages. Wireless networks, satellite networks, mesh networks are really important. And so from a technology standpoint, the answer isn't quite binary, because it's actually the redundancy that someone talked about earlier that is really critical. When one fails, you need the redundancy of the other. And I'll use the analogy of things like your information. Redundancy isn't just a connectivity piece, even while we're talking connectivity. Redundancy is also on the backup of the data that you actually need. So being able to have the extensions, sort of the cloud, the data center extensions, for your services as well. And these are sort of the imaginary things to all of us, right? I just know that I back it up in the cloud. And we need the diverse technology platforms to be able to make sense of it. And then this last thing I'd say is just going back to the manual, the manual and the semi-manual. So information, when things fall apart, we have to be able to cache it somewhere. We need to be able to, I don't know, download a fixed portion of it if the thing isn't working right, or download it overnight because the connectivity platform is running really slow, to be able to give to people. So this is not high tech, but it is being able to use sort of a technology mindset to be able to hand out. Maybe it's stale dated information by a few hours, but it's so vital for a community that might likely need it. I know this is Sarah's baby too, so Sarah, you want to add on to that?
No, you're doing great. The systems are all built on each other, like from an infrastructure standpoint. You're saying that the fiber is the gold standard. Well, it is in your everyday connectivity for a lot of folks. When that is severed, it's a whole rebuild, and your mobile networks are dependent on your fiber network. So the towers are run by deep fiber. So you would think, oh, I have redundancy already because I've got my home internet and I've got my cell phone. Well, that's two technologies. That is a redundancy, but they are inherently tied together. I say, like, mobility is king in a disaster, and satellite technology saved the day for us. It's not the thing that I want to be everyone's home internet, but it is the thing that can get folks online to do some of those critical services. For some folks, it is their home internet. It will be their home internet. For the most part, though, like, having a cache of this equipment is something you could have in place now, and is not a terribly expensive thing. Plus, doing the dirty work of, like, if anyone's worked with Starlink equipment, you have to have the app on your phone. Well, that means you have to be able to get online and your phone be working to get the Starlink unit. So these are things that, like, a digital navigator could be kind of running a disaster preparedness program where you have people who are going to be the receivers of the tech, and they're already set up in a way that it will function. If you're in a community that disasters all the time, like I had the privilege of working with a tribe in Alaska, and they totally function on this kind of technology because their fiber gets cut all the time. So they're like, we'll take resiliency any day over fiber lines, because we can actually set up this whole network to deploy the Starlink units alongside outages, which I thought was quite clever. But as things did come on when the we were gonna get the mobile networks more online faster than everyone's home internet, that's where like the hotspots get really integral, and we deployed those largely with Mission Telecom, like get that stuff out there, because that is a more nimble network than if all your power lines are down and your main fiber infrastructure is down. Rings in the system is what they call it. They'll divert the traffic to get the best, like they'll be on a decision tree on what makes the most sense to do when they're rerouting the network.
So what I think I'm hearing is, I think I'm hearing, so in the chat, Mark is wondering if we should have a workshop on this at Net Inclusion to help folks do some planning and prep and checklist work. I think it's a great idea. Mark, our team will reach out to talk through this with you. But what I'm hearing are some real needs that folks like walking away today, right? Like what can folks do to get prepared for what might come in the next 18 days, right? Rhea said there's a disaster every 18 days. So it's to have an idea of what you will do for connectivity, for folks to have some things on hand in your closet. That asset map, that human asset map that's updated, right? People with the ability to provide digital skills and digital navigation support, right? And I'd say those folks need backups because one person can't do it all. And then, so what else? What else? If you can leave everyone in this room with one thing that they can do to prepare for what might be coming to their community, I'd love to hear from each of you. And Diane, why don't we start with you?
For us, solar charging panels and power banks. And we have a library of things, so we've been able to purchase some extras. But just for library work itself, we have those, and a generator as well. And the one thing I always say, it's all about Diane. When I am looking for funding, tapping into these emergency funding sources is an additional funding stream that a lot of libraries haven't done. But if you think about it, all the things we've been talking about here, these digital skills and a physical building and all of that, I think sets us up well to make the case that we are part of this resiliency in case of emergency and deserve some of the funding for it.
Wonderful. Sarah?
I heard us talk a lot about the stuff, the kinds of physical equipment. What I want to add is relationships outside of your region. If you're in a disaster, everyone in your geography is going through a really hard day, and people in trauma revert to 2 education levels below whatever they achieved. So you're not talking and coordinating, even if you have the ability to communicate via some channel, you are not talking with people who are having their clearest of mind. What I wish I had had before the storm is a list, even if it was just mental, of who these organizations are that are going to try and come into the region and focused on this work. In my case, ITDRC is one I always give a shout out. They do disaster IT work. They gave us devices. They hooked up. They had all the equipment. So all the stuff I want to have now, a lot of that they had, and they were able to deploy in our region. We had the social fabric to do it. We just were missing some of the pieces. A technology I learned a lot about, in addition to Starlink, was Meshtastic. And that might be something that could be like part of the workshop, is some of this tech that we just weren't as familiar with, go over what it looks like and what kind of use case it can be mobilized for.
That's great. Thank you, Sarah. Sabra?
For us, we're a huge government entity with 10 million residents we represent, but that also is a problem. So communication within our own space. So there are partners that we can rely on that we don't think, because we are so big, we we rely on each other, but sometimes when you're trying to reach certain communities or do things in a certain way, it's who else should we be relying on? Is it the radio station? Is it that church? And that was more key for us. And I think stepping out of our typical bureaucratic responses, and also, um, like I said, from my standpoint, raising my hand because we're not something that people are going to think of right away, but contacting our emergency management folks now, because now I know, now I have that, like, hey, there's something I can do here. So I think just helping other people think outside of that, especially when if you're in a large government like Los Angeles County.
Great. And Maria, I'll give you the last word and then we're going to end real quick because it's 2:00.
No problem. And we just kind of invented it this year after experiencing the disaster situation last year. So we just launched our Respond Kit. It's a connectivity kit. And the only reason why was because we believe that every library, every school that acts as a community sort of haven, everybody needs to have a pre-planned, pre-prepared kit. And so being able to connect to 200 people at a time, a small investment that is always, like, as a nonprofit, 60 to 80% off what you would get anywhere else. We have that kit so that everyone can at least have the wireless connectivity, which is so important during disasters.
Okay. Well, thank you so much to my wonderful panelists, and thank you so much to Mission Telecom for co-hosting and sponsoring Digital Inclusion Week. We really appreciate you all, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your Digital Inclusion Week, and we look forward to seeing you at Net Inclusion. So if you haven't already, go register now. Okay, thanks everyone. See you next time.
Thank you.